Okay, official good evening to everyone. Welcome to the November session of our 2025 monthly webinar series. My name is Dana. I'm with the Missouri River Bird Observatory, where our mission is conservation of birds and really all wildlife and their habitats via science, education, and advocacy. And I'm really happy tonight to see some returning folks, but a bunch of new folks as well that I've not seen before. Before we start tonight, I wanted to remind everyone about our very last webinar of 2025. Mr. Bill White, who's the coordinator of the Missouri Native Grasslands Collaborative, will be talking to us about Farm Bill conservation programs. And as I mentioned last month, this may sound like kind of an esoteric topic, but please remember that more than 25 million acres of our precious wetlands and grasslands are conserved by various Farm Bill programs. And Bill is going to be walking us all through a very digestible account of how this works and why it is so important. I have another announcement this evening. We have two new webinar series organized for early 2026. First, we have a stellar lineup of speakers for an entire 5-session series on the plastic pollution crisis. As many of you know, MRBO is partnered with Missouri Stream Teams United to address this issue. And this webinar series is for all plastic concerned folks who would like to take a deep dive into this very critical topic. And then we're still finalizing a couple of speakers on this one, but we're really close. Our 2026 winter webinars are going to be a naturalist series this year, every other Monday night, this usual 6:30 time. We're going to have guest speakers that will highlight a different taxon of critter at each session, although there's 2 bird sessions, of course. We will hear about natural history, current research, and of course, conservation and what we can all do to help these species. I'm going to go ahead and put the registration links for all of those things in the chat when I'm done screen sharing here, and would like to remind everyone that you can always see our upcoming events on mrbo.org. So, stopping here, on to our webinar of the evening. So we here at MRBO have been working with the National Audubon Society since 2012, primarily on the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program. And we are really psyched that tonight's speaker now has a very important position coordinating conservation projects for Audubon here in Missouri and beyond as well. Tara Hohman joined the Audubon Upper Mississippi River team in June of 2019, originally based out of the Audubon Center at Riverlands outside of St. Louis, Missouri. She focuses on bird and habitat conservation and management priorities, as well as working to establish and maintain bird monitoring projects in priority geographies in connection with local, state, and federal partners. Much of Tara's work revolves around bottomland forest avian monitoring along the Mississippi River, as well as conservation ranching in Missouri. A Texas native, she earned a BS in wildlife biology at Texas State University, focusing on habitat and wildlife management methods, and a master's in environmental science and policy at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, studying marsh bird interactions with Great Lakes water levels. Her passion for birds and conservation began with a field technician job serving black rails off the Texas coast during her undergrad, and it has only grown since. Throughout her academic and professional career, Tara's gained experience conducting and coordinating point count surveys and mist netting, as well as many other avian monitoring techniques for a suite of different species. Tara was co-founder of the first Audubon campus chapter in the nation and enjoys sharing her knowledge of birds with others. In her free time, she enjoys thrifting, birding, cooking, and art. And someday I want to hear about the black rails. So please take it away.
I have stories. I'm more than happy to talk about them. Here, I will share my screen. Thank you. All right. Oops. That's shown up well.
All good.
Perfect. Let's get going. Well, thanks for having me. I did see a few familiar names in our participants list, so welcome, welcome. And so, yes, I'm Tara Hohman. I'm a senior conservation manager with Audubon's UMR, Upper Mississippi River program. And so that essentially incorporates the states of Minnesota, Iowa, and Missouri. And I get to cover Missouri. and today I'm going to be talking about our big rivers to prairie conservation work that we do in the state. So many are very familiar with Audubon and how it's laid out, but just for some clarification, I'm going to do a little bit of background. So National Audubon, of course, is a network of chapters, nature centers, national and state staff, partners, and supporters, all to create a nice web of conservation. We are not only national, but we are international. We have teams and staff who also work in Canada and South and Central America. And we have 18 state and regional offices, 32 nature centers, 23 sanctuaries, 160 different campus chapters, and 452 chapters all over the place, as this map shows. And here in Missouri, we have a great little fraction of that. We have about 9 active chapters across the state that engage approximately 10,000 different people. We have 1 campus chapter out of Missouri State University, and of course, the Audubon Center of Riverlands, which is located right outside of St. Louis, all to hit an about approximate audience of like 19,000 people. So we have a pretty good span in the state. And within our current National Audubon's current flight plan, we have 4 really big conservation milestones that we aim to hit. One being habitat conservation, which aims to be a connected network of climate resilient land and waters across the America. We have our climate action, which is aimed at swift and responsible deployment of renewable energy and natural climate solutions. We have policy, which is our government action and funding for birds on the planet, and of course our community building, which is bird lovers working together to advance our shared vision. So today I'm going to be touching a lot on the habitat conservation side of things, mostly on our Water for Birds and People program, which includes our Mississippi River work, and our Wings Over Working Land initiative, which is all based with conservation ranching. So I'm going to be going into kind of 2 parts. First, I'm going to be diving into the Mississippi River and everything that we've been doing there. And then to follow up, I'll be diving into our conservation ranching initiative. So our Upper Mississippi River program pretty much spans the 5 states all along the Upper Mississippi River, or UMR, as I will likely refer to it from this point on. And all of this is focused around burn monitoring and science, as well as habitat restoration and enhancement. My background for this project is predominantly burn monitoring and science and how we use that to influence management. So when we think about the Upper Mississippi River and its bottomland forests, I think of a few things. First, bottomland forests are some of the largest intact forest habitats that we still have. They provide valuable resources for migratory and breeding birds. They're on the river. They're typically the first things to kind of green and leaf out, so the resources are typically really abundant there first before birds want to move up into the uplands once those really start getting to go. But of course, it's a water system, so it's also very dynamic and subjective to the hydrology of their system. So this is a picture from one of our survey sites off the Mississippi. What you see like through the tree line there isn't the river, it's a slough. And this was an extra wet year where that water typically would have been receded by now to just the slough, but we had probably a couple inches that we got to walk through. But unfortunately, we've lost nearly half of our bottomland forests from 1891 to 1989 due to agriculture conversion, urban expansion, poor forest management, and the lock and dam being established up and down the river. And they continue to decline under current pressures like longer flooding periods, disease, and invasives. You add that to the fact that we've also lost nearly 30% of our eastern forest birds since 1970. It emphasizes all the reasons why we do our work and all of the importance that we need to start working to help manage this system better and better for birds as we try to combat all of these declines on both ends. So we have been working on the river since 2011. So all of this is based right out of St. Louis at the Audubon Center at Riverlands. That's where this work started. So we focus on avian conservation while accomplishing forestry goals, ultimately benefiting birds in the places they need, while also reflecting back on national goals to manage, protect, and restore more than 1 million acres of habitat and watersheds. So I mentioned that this all started out of St. Louis. So we partnered with the Corps back in 2012 to help give them an opportunity to understand how all of their restoration work on the river was benefiting wildlife. Because at the time, most of their focus was how were they going to benefit the forest and the habitat, not what was it impacting as a result. So the core districts on the UMR developed an Upper Mississippi River systematic forest stewardship plan. It's a mouthful. I like to just call it a forest stewardship plan, and that's still a lot. But essentially, it outlined exactly everything that they plan to do for the forests across the UMR, what their goals were, how they're aiming the management, so everything they needed. So we came in and we helped to develop an avian stewardship plan to act as an addendum to that. So, like the forest plan, it outlines local bird species that we're interested in, how we should be monitoring them, and how we can use that data to reflect back on those habitat management strategies. So, back in 2014, we started our bigger scope of surveys on the river, again, based out of St. Louis. And since then, we've grown. We've had so many partners who are engaging with this project now. Back in 2021, we started monitoring in Minnesota for the first time. And then this past 2 years was our first time surveying in Iowa. So we're slowly filling in some gaps. And I have a map that I can show you guys, so show kind of that expansion too. And I feel like this is a silly slide for this group. I think we all know why we want to monitor birds. But essentially, the best use for birds is their indication of habitat health. They're great indicators. They're really easy to detect. The people in the public love them. Everyone knows what a bird is. Everyone can typically name off at least one bird that's connected with them in one way or the other, good or bad, whether it was a goose attacking you as a child or you watching the nighthawks fly around at night. Everyone knows a bird. They're very well studied, so we can make a lot of connections just based off of previous data and the data we continue to build on. They're found pretty much everywhere. That also makes it really easy. And we can look at such a huge spans of time because they're migratory and wide-ranging. So they're really the perfect and almost simplest way to look at habitat health compared to other wildlife and taxa. So for our bottomland forest work, we actually use 9 different focal species to represent our aims and our projects. So these 9 focal species represent different forest community types within the bottomland umbrella. Some of these are super easy to detect. If they're there, you're definitely going to hear them. Warbling vireos, for instance, indigo buntings all over the place. Some of these are pretty elusive. They might even be species of conservation concern, like cerulean warblers, red-shouldered hawks. Those two, for instance, very few and far between. Depending on where you are in the river, you might hear more, you might hear less. So all of these are really important in how we see, or if we don't see them, it's really telling to not only the forest community type that we're currently doing surveys in, and also that overall health. And so I would say for this work, we have 3 main goals. The first is to influence adaptive management on the ground. And we do that through evaluating bird response to vegetation structure and management. So we want to be able to say exactly what you're aiming to create in forestry prescriptions to benefit this species or this group of species. And we also want to say that, well, if you do it now, you're going to see if you did this work here, you're going to see a positive response by these species or that species. We also want to create science-informed conservation. We want to identify priority areas for conservation and restoration work. So we need to make sure that the work we're doing is going to have the most impact, especially in the state of things. Funds are limited, funds might be scarce. We want to make sure we use those funds wisely. And of course, we want to integrate an Upper Mississippi River forest bird monitoring framework. So this essentially just means that we want to have a standardized way of doing things that can be shared with partners and where their standardized work can be shared with us. So that's making sure that we're using the most up-to-date science, things that can be replicable and that are easy to share out. So as I transition, I just have fun photos from in the field. So this is a slough on another island that we do bird surveys on. So a lot of these dead trees you see are a response of the 2019 flood that we had. For those who were based by the rivers, you definitely know exactly how big that flood was. It wasn't the extent or the volume of the flood that was bad for the trees. It was the length that it stayed on the landscape. So a lot of the trees couldn't tolerate that amount of time underwater. And so a lot of them died. So we see a lot of dead trees like this in some of those lower elevated spots along the river. For some birds, this wasn't great. For other birds, they actually loved all the tree die-off. And I have numbers I'll show you later, but red-headed woodpeckers love dead trees. They love this stuff. So this project area, this slide here just shows you our large scope of our current work that we do on the UMR. I'm scaling it down to Missouri from this point on. But we cover 11 different pools. So those who are unfamiliar with the pool, it essentially is the section of river in between two locks and dams. The locks and dams start just south of Minneapolis, St. Paul, up in Minnesota, and actually end down in St. Louis at Mel Price, or Lock and Dam 26. And so we cover about 11 different pools along the Mississippi River, and that covers about 80 different island and conservation areas that span either, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Illinois, or Wisconsin. And we have placed over 700 survey points across that zone. And most of these areas that we survey are owned by Fish and Wildlife, the Army Corps, or state agencies. Now, when it comes to Missouri, where we have our biggest extent of data, and longest term data, we cover 3 pools, 24, 25, and 26. They span about 50 plus sites, over 400 survey points. And we also cover the Illinois River on this stretch. There's just the lower 80 miles or so. But this is the only stretch where we cover a different river system. And just from numbers alone, this is also where we have our most intensive work. It's our largest scale, is here in the St. Louis region. So we do typical point count surveys. So we have established points that are spaced about 400 meters apart. And we go out and hike out to those points and stand there for 10 minutes and detect everything we can see or hear. These surveys start in mid-May and end in mid-July, so these are breeding bird surveys. We get to most of our sites by motorboat. When we can, we'll kayak, and very fewer times do we actually get to just hike out on a road. We go out in teams of 2 individuals, one acting as an observer who's doing the bird survey and IDing everything, and the other acting as a recorder. We only survey our points once per season, so these are a snapshot of the birds that we are hearing or seeing at that time and at that moment. Some other survey methods have repeat visits where you can get a good average. We're doing a snapshot just because of the size of the project that we're doing. We typically survey about 160 points a season, and it takes a lot of travel time to get from each point. And so we need to use as much time as we can to collect data, but also get to our full extent. Um, and we also record things like time of first detection and distance to observer to help correct for things like observer bias. We have new teams every season. We hire people in. And so we need to correct for that, but also to correct for differences in species detection. And all of this data is in turn connected back to habitat. So we're relating our bird data to forest inventory that's collected by the Army Corps and other partners like Fish and Wildlife, a few contractors, and a few other nonprofits. And with that, we help identify variables that we think are important to foresters to help measure, as well as bird management. When we think of bird management, we think about a lot of structure rather than species. A certain tree species, by all means, will be very important, but there's probably structural components with how big it is, how young it is it close with other trees that might make more of an impact? And so we use these things to help understand why birds are selecting the habitat they use and helping to influence those management prescriptions. So with any given season, this essentially is what we see. So this is from 2 years ago. The first photo off to the left is pretty much where we start walking in. You'll see higher elevation. There's a lot of trumpet creeper. The photo on the right, of course, is further into this island and things get a little bit more inundated. We have a couple inches of water on the ground and we get a hike through there. You'll see a few bug nets here and there. You'll see boots. This was the day I took the education team out from Riverlands and we got to wade through a slough. We did not make it to the other side. It got too deep, but they learned a lot about what we do that day and I think they enjoyed it. They have not been out since. And then this is a typical day. We're mostly motorboating out to these sites. This is a nice calm day on the Mississippi River with our beautiful boat. But we also get a kayak and some pretty neat systems, get lost a few times. But anything just to get out to our spot, we use what's most efficient for that site and in that moment. All right. So what do we do with all this data? So I'm going to be throwing a bunch of numbers your way. And a lot of it's just what we've been able to collect. A lot of it's our most up-to-date results, which is great. We have one more year of data that we're currently analyzing through. So these numbers might look a little different if you hear one of my talks at any given point next year. But we have a ton of data. The years that we don't have data are from floods where we couldn't access sites safely. COVID was another year where we just weren't sure how to do the work given all the restrictions. It was very new. But this is the bulk of our work. So I have numbers for Missouri and I also have numbers across the UMR in our greater scope of work. So for our 9 focal species, even though we ID all birds we can see or hear, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm focusing on our 9 focal species. So yellow-breasted chat had the lowest density overall for Missouri, and this is out of the species we can look at density estimates for. This makes a lot of sense to me. Having done these surveys for years and years and years now, you don't hear them very often. A lot of it has to do with the habitat available to them. You're not in a lot of areas where their proper kind of shrubby, scrubby, thicker habitat is available. However, prothonotary warblers have the highest density, both in Missouri and across the reach, which is great. Prothonotaries are a great focal species for bottomland forests. If you had to pick one, most people would pick a prothonotary warblers. For the most part, we're doing really well. We're having high density of species that we would expect. There are a few species you'll see listed here under the Missouri side with insufficient data. It just means we don't have enough detections for them. Even though we've been doing this for years and years and years, cerulean warblers have a very short window of when they can be detected, which doesn't help with some of our timelines. Red-shouldered hawks also have very large territories. If you hear them calling or see them flying over, that's great. And we do, but you won't see another one for a while because they just break it up so much. And willow flycatcher is one that eludes me. Some of the habitat needs I think are missing in terms of the amount of willow that we see at certain sites. But we can also look at trends, and I think trends are a lot more telling. Densities are kind of fun to compare, but trends over time really help us paint a picture of what we might need to look into. So American redstarts are one that have a significant negative trend across the region. Red-headed woodpeckers on the other end have a significant positive trend across the region. I kind of mentioned earlier my thoughts on red-headed woodpeckers. A lot of the tree die-off helped them a lot. Woodpeckers love dead trees. I also expect the prothonotary warblers to really be doing well. They're stable in this instance. I would see even a potential increase with all the new cavities available to them. But a few more years down the line, and we'll be able to see if that is a true pattern. But American redstarts are one that's kind of unique. A lot of the partners up north beyond these surveys have also been noticing that with them, that we're detecting fewer and fewer. So we'll see negative trends. Does it mean that there's fewer redstarts on the landscape? Maybe. It might just also mean that they're moving to different habitat types and different ecosystems on the landscape, and we're just detecting fewer of them in this specific area. So it doesn't mean they're in a downward spiral. It just means we're detecting fewer of them every year. So this is our trend line for American redstarts, a lot easier to understand the numbers. And here's our beautiful increase for red-headed woodpeckers. So all of this needs to play back into managing forests for birds. So we use 9 different forest variables that are listed here. And these were selected because they were deemed important to birds as well as on-the-ground managers. So if we look at these and we relay them back to our 9 focal species, we can find which ones have the highest relative importance to these birds to increase their occurrence probability. So if we have one of these and it's highly important, we are more likely to see these species in that site that has those features. So for instance, our top 3 here for all of our 9 focal species is pool. So this is more so of like a regional basis, and that makes a lot of sense because some of our focal species don't go into Minnesota. So pool is going to have a big factor there. Canopy depth is also another important factor, as well as total basal area. Total basal area being the sum of the cross-sectional area of all the trees in a given stand, or kind of like stand density in an easier sense. So basal area was really important outside of pool. So we can put that out for all 9 of our focal species and get an outline of exactly how much basal area we're looking for certain species, which is great for writing those prescriptions. We can also do it for a single species and pull out everything. So for American redstarts, we can see that canopy height, trees per acre, and total basal area are the most important features to them based off of our modeling. So we can use these graphs here to help outline how much trees per acre is going to give us the highest occurrence probability and move from there. So this is all great. There's my little redstart flying. But where do we focus our work? So we can map out the most important or a spatial prioritization areas for all of our focal species as well as individual species. These are put together with a whole bunch of modeling using structured point count data that we collect and partners collect. eBird data, which is referred as unstructured because it doesn't have baselines that you're having to hit. You just get to go outside and bird as long or as frequently as you want. Structured point count surveys follows a few more rules. We also throw in some environmental predictors, and voila, we get a beautiful map like this for all of our focal species. You can see the river in green. You can also see, where's my mouse? Up here towards the driftless regions, really important, as well as down by Shawnee, and of course the Ozarks. You can also just see the green, makes it a little bit easier to spot those highlighted areas. I mentioned you can also do it for individual species. So you can see the variation between all of these different species. We have redstarts here, ceruleans in the middle, and indigo buntings here. So depending on the species, your focus is going to look a lot different. There they go again. And a lot of that's a lot of information. It's all lots of graphs, lots of figures, lots of numbers. It's easy to talk about, but it's really hard to digest and regurgitate onto paper. So we're working on developing a bottomland forest for birds manual, which essentially is going to provide management recommendations to improve habitat for birds in bottomlands, identifying those areas that are important, listing them as areas that should be maintained, or maybe areas that need to be restored or enhanced, summarizing a lot of our research findings and habitat associations, trends and priorities, how birds are responding to management actions, as well as addressing research needs and data gaps for the birds and the forests. We're talking the UMR, it's a big chunk of area. So our aim is to organize this by forest communities. Any on-the-ground manager will know what kind of trees they have on their landscape, and they can use that to kind of narrow down where they want to read in this document. And also, of course, using focal species that can represent the variation in the system, as well as represent feasible management goals, because we want to be able to measure success or downfalls, and we don't want to make it difficult by using species that we rarely see, which is ironic that I show a cerulean here. And the work's never done. We continue to collect our bird data along the river. Models are very hungry for bird data, and we love to collect it. So we're going to continue that, especially to help answer new questions. We're continuing to build new connections between birds and forest management. We have a few new ongoing projects to help outline more landscape-based responses. And of course, continuing to investigate and identify research gaps and needs for birds and forests in the UMR. Sometimes easier said than done, but that's our goals. All right. Switching gears, I'm now going to talk about our Audubon Conservation Ranching Initiative. So the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program partners with farmers and ranchers to enhance the biodiversity, productivity, and resilience of grassland ecosystems for birds and the people that depend on them. So the majority of grasslands are privately owned or managed. And the fate of grassland birds is fairly dependent on private landowners because of this. And through this program, we're using the economic forces that are impacting land use decisions and helping inform consumers to help support on-the-ground conservation. So, like forest birds, grassland birds aren't doing great. In fact, they're doing even worse. So they have lost 43% of grassland birds since 1970. Pictured here is a grasshopper sparrow. In fact, 1 in 4 breeding birds have been lost in the US and Canada in the past 50 years. Grasslands have had the biggest suffering of all the birds in the terrestrial biome. And that's mainly due to habitat conversion, tree and shrub encroachment, and pesticide applications. So again, another big priority system that we need to make a focus on. It isn't news to most, but our aim is to benefit grassland birds, focusing on bird conservation and connecting the habitat. All of the current good grassland systems, native or reintroduced or enhanced, that are public are going to be here. They're there. They're being conserved and managed well. In order to increase those acres, private lands are going to give us that opportunity. And so this all reflects back on National's goal to conserve 300 million acres of connected, climate-resilient bird habitat. We work with a number of partners, one being our very own MRBO, on this project. We also coordinate with MDC and NRCS, or the Natural Resource Conservation Service, with USDA, all to help make this work happen. So for this program, we actually have 14 target species here in Missouri. So again, similar to our bottomland forest work, some of these species represent different habitat needs, different structural needs. You'll see a repeater here with red-headed woodpecker, because who could hate a red-headed woodpecker? Also, they represent nice open woodland and parkland systems that you might see in some of our private lands very well too. But you'll also see that I have a red circle around 9 of these. These are also species that are included in the Missouri Bird Technical Plan. And so I just wanted to highlight the connection there between work that's happening in the state and how we're relating back. So these are our 14 essential messengers for our targets here in the state. So where are we working when it comes to conservation ranching in Missouri? And Dana, you'll have to correct me if I found the wrong number on this, but conservation ranching actually started in Missouri. I have back in 2017. It feels like that's too late in years, but it started in Missouri with MDC and folks from Audubon helping bring this program together. It's now found in 15 different states and counting. We have more states that are getting this program off the ground. And so I will not be surprised if that number increases by at least a handful in the next year. We currently have 10 certified ranches in Missouri. Each of those are represented by one of these different county squares. And that covers over 8,800 acres of managed grassland bird habitat. So, which is, if you're thinking about the Midwest and the average size of ranches and farms, we have some of the biggest coverage, which is a bragging point, as I've been told by fellow colleagues who work in different states. So we're doing great. We have 3 pillars that help represent the program. The first is habitat management. So ranchers who are certified with ACR, or conservation ranching, will adopt a habitat management plan that addresses site-specific habitat goals and management actions to benefit target grassland bird species. We also have a pillar on animal health and welfare, meaning that our certified ranches demonstrate a commitment to properly caring for livestock by adhering to livestock production methods that reflect best practices for animal health and welfare. And lastly, our final pillar is environmental sustainability, restricting pesticide use, minimizing fertilizer, protecting stream banks, resulting in cleaner streams, healthier soils, increased plant diversity, and more pollinators. So we're trying to have a big picture effect here. Not only are we benefiting birds, but we're increasing the quality and the health of these cow and bison on the landscape, as well as everything else that interacts with that ecosystem. So our habitat management plans are developed for each ranch. They're 3 years line and time scale, but after those 3 years, we'll edit it and add in more time to meet the current needs of the ranch. We provide habitat for target grassland birds. We do restoration, diversification, invasive species brush control. We're trying to build that cycle of disturbance and recovery, which was historic to our old grassland systems, with the bison moving across, disturbance, recovery, and the birds would follow. So that's things like regenerative grazing and managed grazing as appropriate to help create that mosaic of habitat. Again, animal health and well care, that means things like no feedlots. These cow or bison are unconfined. We have good health statuses, no antibiotics or hormones, proper cattle handling, and USDA or state inspected processing plants. So here's a nice little diagram of rotational grazing in the grassland ecosystem. So we have a nice positive feedback here where we have the grazing and the disturbance longer time since disturbance, you start getting more coverage back that some of these focal bird species are selecting for. You have your nice rest period. You have areas that are recently grazed that might be shorter. All of these grasses that are starting to grow back in are bringing more nutrients into the soil, more carbon storage, and also more water retention. Here's just another diagram that kind of says the same thing. Depending on your intensity that you're in your stocking rate of each of these grazing pastures, and where you are in the cycle, you're providing that different habitat and the mosaic that we're striving for to benefit the biggest diversity of grassland birds and ultimately create those big ecosystem services. And so environmental sustainability, our third pillar, so that means things like riparian protection, nutrient management, no broadcast spraying unless it's approved at the HMP. There are exceptions. And supporting insect diversity, not using neonicotinoids, things like that. So how does this happen? How does someone get certified? Well, first, they have to show interest in the program. We'll make an assessment to determine their eligibility and suitability for the program. So we have a few requirements in our HMP. It works for most folks, but for others, maybe it's just not a right fit for their ranch. We develop an HMP or habitat management plan, and that can take a little bit of time. We're mapping out different assets on the landscape. But once that's finalized and signed, the rancher will sign up with the program agreement with Audubon, and then the actions are initiated to help meet those goals outlined in the management plan and with the program standards. We have a certification audit that gets scheduled and conducted by a third party, especially prior to livestock being sold. So that's health and welfare. And then finally, the ranch product is approved for the Audubon seal, which you can see in the lower corner, if the audit results are acceptable. So this can take 6 months on a minimum. Sometimes it takes a little longer. It depends on a few different steps of the process. And by all means, if at some point someone says, I don't want to be certified, but I want to learn more about bird-friendly practices, that's a win too. We're definitely okay with getting those connections made as well. You do not have to reach out, and if you can't fit certification, we're still providing some of the resources that we have to help do bird-friendly habitat in private lands. So bird monitoring, which is done by our lovely MRBO, is conducted every 2 or 3 years during the breeding season. And we use that with land cover data and other variables to help develop bird friendliness index, another MRBO staple, for each ranch. And that evaluates the capacity of the landscape to support an abundant, diverse, and resilient grass and bird community. It also gives us a really nice number that we can track over those different survey years to see if it gets higher or lower, better or worse. And so I'm going to go through these slides a little quick. I know they're very wordy, but I will synopsize them. So biodiverse benefits. Of course, I mentioned earlier, this is for birds and overall biodiversity. We're using grassland birds as indicator species in this example, looking at conditions of the environment. We're helping create that patchwork that helps with wildlife diversity. It's not only good for birds, but it's good for pollinators. It's good for other mammals, insects, etc. It also helps improve plant species diversity. We're introducing a lot more warm season grasses to some of these sites. So that's increasing the diversity of plants, of grasses, forbs, overall making the grassland more resilient, deeper roots, a different kind of grass from maybe the current cool season grasses that are typically found, so that you have more tolerance to different weather conditions throughout the year. So that helps with things like below ground biodiversity. So different plants help with different soil microbiome needs and microorganisms. Water conservation, because fertilizers and pesticides are restricted, we have cleaner water. Also, all of this habitat management also creates a protection of riparian areas and wetlands. Um, and going deeper, there's a lot more carbon in conservation, ranching. Healthy grasslands capture carbon at levels that can play a major role in mitigating climate change. So again, this kind of mentions the same stuff. Birds and biodiversity, mosaic of habitats, good for everything. Carbon sequestration, more plants, more diversity of plants captures more carbon. We create different growth cycles, which also helps draw in more carbon, and we make it climate resilient. So some fun facts and data, especially when it comes to the birds. Grassland bird abundance increased by 36% at the first 35 Audubon certified bird-friendly ranches that were monitored back in 2016 to 2019, which is a great, great increase. And at Round Rock Ranch, which was the first Audubon certified ranch in Missouri, some of their different patch burn grazing and the conversion of fescue back to native plants had recovered the way to about 5 times more northern bobwhite quail and 6 times more eastern meadowlarks on their property. Birds that everyone wants to see more of, and we got to see those positive results. So, Audubon in Missouri, we're working on expanding our role in the state more and more, especially when it comes to conservation ranching. We've had our presence in the state, but we have more capacity. Me being in this newer role to be at the table more and help meet new ranchers, meet new people interested in making things bird friendly on their properties, as well as working more with a lot of those other private lands biologists to help make sure that we're covering as much bird friendliness as we can. We're also continuing to improve habitat for bottomland forest birds, and we'll continue to strive to do that not only on the Mississippi River, but also on other rivers and streams that we have in the state. And we're always finding new opportunities to collaborate with partners to help bend the bird curve. And with that, I will take any questions. I also have my email here in case anyone has a follow-up that they think of later. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. And audio was all good the whole time.
I told you
Yeah, I know.
it'll
It
probably
worked.
mess up now, but
Nope.
it'll work.
I looked it up after you made that mention, and we were doing surveys for Audubon and MDC's partnership in 2012 in Nebraska and Kansas. So I bet it was the first ranch certification in 2017.
That's what I was
That would
thinking. I was
that would
like,
make
after you
sense.
said that, I was like, this number doesn't make sense. Who gave me this number before my time?
I bet it's certified because that the process to get everything that you just said in place took a pretty long time.
Yeah. Well, we all learned something today. I learned that it wasn't 2017. Perfect.
We have two questions, both of which I think are super awesome. One is from Diane, who's I know is in St. Louis. And this was actually with the bottomland forest part, but I it also applies. Who selected the focal species and how?
Yes.
Probably.
So both were done before my time or before I got involved, like with conservation ranching. I think our last update on these focal species was 2024. For our bottomland forest birds, that was done back in 2012 by previous staff with Audubon and one of our quantitative scientists. So which
Mhm.
I don't know if you're asking like why these species. I love to make changes to this list, and there will be more species listed and some edits made to our manual because after looking at these birds for so long as I have, some of them fit better than others. There's good intentions when they were picked to
Mhm.
fit different forest communities. But some of them work a little better than others when it actually comes to bottomland and floodplain systems. Same thing with grasslands. I think there's a few that could be tweaked but they hit the most general appeal to the different habitat types and like communities that you might find on any of those landscapes.
Unfortunately, we might have to take the greater prairie chicken out since we don't really have them anymore.
I know. I
Um,
feel
let's see. Great question here from Danny in the chat. Do ranchers get subsidies or rebates for getting the certification other than doing it for the environment and because it's right? I don't know if there's anything else in it for them.
Yes, so Audubon pays for the entire certification process, which is actually can be quite expensive between the third party audit, our time, everything involved. And so that's one way that they get some money back is that they don't have to pay to get this certification. We handle that. We also, and this varies from state to state, county to county, but we do work with like NRCS to have some different like cost share opportunities. So if they fit a program, we'll fit them in it. Or if we know of a different program that fits some of their plans outlined in the habitat management plan, maybe they want to put in a whole bunch of fencing. If we can't help provide cost shares for that, and we know of another partner who does, we help make those connections. So we work in any ways we can to help with those costs when we can make it work. Great question.
Tara, does Audubon, I'm not sure how you do this, but does Audubon have data on like that ranchers are getting higher prices for their beef because of the Audubon certification, right?
Mm,
Because like I, as a bird lover, would, if I could, pay more for beef with the Audubon label. I don't know
yeah,
if
no.
I don't know what the data are.
So we're starting to dive into that more. Sorry, I looked around. We have storm coming through, so it's fun outside. But so we recently hired a like community scientist who's working on doing just that and getting some surveys done to make just to check in on all of that because I think that's something that we haven't been able to dive into too much, but we're looking to do that here in the near future. That and a myriad of other questions. Yeah.
And it looks like our last question, which is also a cool one. Have you documented species outside of the focal list that surprised the data collectors?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So we were doing surveys, I swear it was like July on the river, and it was an out of season white-throated sparrow. And I'm like, it's July. You're not supposed to be here anymore. You're supposed to be gone forever, just singing its little heart out. And I swear I threw it on an eBird record because I was like, oh, this is crazy. But I don't think anyone believed me. They're like, nonsense. I had recordings. But that was probably the most outrageous bird I've had on any of the surveys. Everything else can make sense enough. You can rationalize many of the others, but that one sticks with me. I'm going to put a few links in the chat while we do this. If anyone's looking for more information on any of these programs, I just put a link in on our bottomland forest work. I'm putting another one in for our conservation ranching work across Audubon. And the last link is if you're interested on where you can find bird-friendly beef products, there's a map that shows you exactly where you can find them in your area.
Perfect. Anybody have any more questions or comments? Look at the perfect timing.
I
All
swear,
right.
practice works, guys.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Tara, thank you so much. I learned a lot too. I have notes even. So
Anytime.
good stuff.
I love to talk about this stuff, so this is great.
All right. Have a good evening to all.